Hello once again, friends, neighbors, fellow Christians. Welcome back to our ministry here at What the Bible Says. Again, we so deeply appreciate you taking the time, investing your precious time in watching these videos and studying along with us. And we hope that these studies are helpful and beneficial to you in your studies of God's Word. And so we are getting back into our new series that is entitled Debunking Unitarians. And so I welcome you again to our study. And in this episode, I want to direct your attention to Johnnie Barnes' denigration of 1 Timothy 3 and verse 16. Now, this verse reads, "And without controversy, great is the mystery of godliness. God was manifested in the flesh." You catch that? God was manifested in the flesh, justified in the Spirit, seen by angels, preached among the Gentiles, believed on in the world, received up into glory. Now, if this verse is left just as we read it, then it certainly is fatal to Unitarianism. So Johnnie insists that this verse most likely is a forgery. And in the King James reading, God was manifested in the flesh. That's just a forgery. And so, because this passage sits at the intersection of textual criticism, patristic testimony, and Christology, then I'm going to respond at length to Johnnie's claims. The goal isn't brevity, it's accuracy. And it's accuracy as simply as I can make it so that you can both easily understand it as well as do your own research, which I certainly encourage you to do. Now, we will show not only that Johnnie's case is overstated, but that it suffers from a pattern we've seen before, and that is selective scholars, selective data, and strained logic, if we besmirch the word. And so, reading Johnnie's words, he says, quote, "The King James Version says God was manifested in the flesh, but most modern translations read He was manifested in the flesh. The manuscript evidence overwhelmingly supports Hos, and that's a pronoun, who, not Theos, God. Metzinger says no early unicals support Theos. This is most likely a forgery. So we shouldn't use this text to support the Trinity," end quote. And so the controversy is over whether or not the correct reading is the noun Theos, rendered God, or Hos, a pronoun, rendered he, who, or which, as we see in a variety of modern translations. And so Johnnie's selected source of authority here is Bruce Metzger. Again, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. You're close. Metzger, Metzger. But I want you to notice the blatant selectivity. He doesn't bother to mention any other scholars, such as Albert Barnes or Adam Clarke or H.A.W. Meyer, all well-known commentators who discuss this exact question in detail. Albert Barnes, after a careful survey, he says the probability favors Theos, while he concedes that the evidence isn't decisive enough to build the entire argument on this one verse. And he still affirms the incarnation is taught abundantly elsewhere, such as Matthew 1:23 and John 1 and verse 14. And so let's go down here to the desktop, and we'll show you right here. So you should be able to see this on your screen. I've got some text here highlighted in yellow. And again, you can look this up for yourself. It's very easy. Just go to BibleHub.com and click the verse, put the verse in, click on commentaries, and go to Barnes. It's very simple if you don't already have Barnes on your computer. He says it was a common thing to abridge or contract words in the manuscript, and thus, you see these two little letters right here, would be used for this word right here, which is pater or father. And then these two little letters for this word right here, kyrios, which means Lord. And then these two letters right here for the noun theos, rendered God. And he says, the words thus contracted were designated by a faint line or dash over them. In this place, therefore, if the original unicals, that means all capital letters, unicals. If these were capitals, this was this right here, okay? Standing for, it represents theos, all right, God. And the line in the O, the omicron there, you see that? It would be an omicron. But what he's saying is the faint line over this, if it's faded out, if it's obliterated for any cause, which is likely the case, then it would be easy to mistake this contraction as the pronoun hos, or who. All right? And so, again, this is something that Johnnie did not point out. He didn't point out anything about, in the manuscripts, this contraction of words. And so, when we look at Adam Clarke, now see here, this is important because Adam Clarke personally examined the Codex Alexandrinus, and he concluded that it originally read theos, and he explains exactly how the confusion with hos would occur. And so, if you're going to invoke what the scholars say, then you don't get to hide what the scholars who disagree with your conclusion, what they say. So this is textbook cherry picking of information. And that's like saying, well, all scientists or all doctors agree on XYZ. Well, of course they do when all who disagree are censored. Now, to me, this is it's either premeditated or it is through gross ignorance. But anyway, whatever, it is an omission of nomina, sacra, all right? And that's referred to as the sacred contractions of these divine names. So Johnnie either is very unstudied and therefore very unqualified to be telling anyone anything about manuscript evidence, or he is purposely avoiding telling viewers this basic point of manuscript studies that both Barnes and Clarke stress, and in the early unical, again that refers to the early manuscripts were written in all capital letters, all right, and that in these manuscripts divine names were routinely written as nomina sacra. Again, that's Latin for sacred names, and I hope I'm pronouncing it at least close. All right, so what is easy to see then, and let's go down here to the desktop again and look at this. And so you should be able to see this on your screen right here, how that these are contracted. Okay, this is literally what the controversy is over, is that little line and my pointer. I've got a cursor instead of a pointer. That little horizontal line right there inside what looks like an O, all right? If it's faded, then it looks like this. And so the contraction, instead of referring to a noun, theos, could be mistaken for the pronoun hos. And so, again, that literally is what is being contested. That's what the controversy is over. But Johnnie breathed not one word of this evidence that, again, is so easy to find by just going to Bible Hub, just looking in your commentaries, and it's amply pointed out. And so, again, if that little horizontal stroke is faded with time, then theos, the contracted form of theos, could be easily misread for the pronoun hos and be who or he or which. So, again, that is the entire mechanism by which the variation arose. And hiding this from viewers preloads the conclusion against the King James reading, a New King James reading, which is what I used, and is, frankly, it is either severe ignorance or it is premeditated bias on the part of Johnnie. And so, again, the first letter is the theta, that looks like the O with a little line in it. And then the end is sigma, and that's what looks like the M turned on its side. And then that shape without the little line in the center is the omicron. And then the K is kappa. You've probably seen some of these letters in college sororities. I know they use a lot of times they'll use the sigma and the kappa at least. They'll use the alpha and the delta. But anyway, that's what those characters are. And so Metzger actually summarizes this, and since Johnnie appears to be relying on Bruce Metzger, here is the gist of Metzger's judgment in his work, A Textual Commentary on the Greek New Testament. Now, he favors hos, the pronoun, as the original reading, and he rates it as certain because it is supported by the earliest and best unicals and a wide early versional and patristic spread. And he explains theos likely arose later either by this nomina sacra confusion that we've been talking about, or possibly by a dogmatic clarification. And this is a standard critical position and does not by itself advance a Unitarian reading of the meaning of this verse. Now, I have something going on with my ear, echo over here. Anyway, we've looked at Barnes and Clarke. Let's look at another one. And this is H.A.W. Meyer. Again, you can find this on BibleHub.com. And so he makes the note that, and I want to point this out before we move deeper into the evidence. I want to pause for a simple word on manuscript traditions. I don't want to get over technical and lose you before and bore you out of your wits. So here is the big picture. The Textus Receptus is the printed Greek text behind the King James Bible, produced in the 1500s from a handful of late manuscripts. The majority text represents the reading found in the vast majority of Greek manuscripts that we have, and there are literally thousands of them. And so here's what matters in regards to this passage. In 1 Timothy 3:16, both the Textus Receptus and the majority text read, God was manifested in the flesh. The only reason some modern versions say who or he is because they follow a very small number of early manuscripts. So when Johnnie throws out this broad, sweeping claim of forgery, well, he's likely counting on his viewers not taking the initiative to dig deeper and to investigate his claims. Almost all of the manuscripts we actually have support the traditional reading of theos, the noun, God, was manifested in the flesh. And independently of Johnnie's citation of Metzger, let's check this third source of H.A.W. Meyer, another major critical commentator. And let's see what he actually says. And I'll give you a spoiler alert. Once again, when we read Meyer, we find more scholarly materials that undercuts Johnnie's assertions. But I'm getting ahead of the game here. So, man, what's going on with my ear? I'm going up in elevation and the ear's not popping. Meyer notes that important authorities read Hos, but he also lists substantial witnesses for theos, including manuscripts D, K, L, and nearly all cursives, and an array of Greek fathers. He even flags early extra-patristic lines that echo God manifested in the flesh. And so, again, we're going to go right back down here to the desktop. And hopefully everything is working here, and you can see this. And this is a section of his text that I copied and pasted here so that you can see it. And I want to notice in the highlighted areas, again, we've already looked at this right here. I just did that so that you could see the little line in the theta there. Okay, and he says that most important authorities have the reading Hos, and he lists the manuscripts A, C, F, G, and so on. But notice that he also points out that the Textus Receptus theos is found, and also in the D, K, and L, and nearly all cursives, which I just said, and that's in there because of one of my keystroke buttons. But here's what I want you to notice, folks. Please observe this. And all of these names down through here that he lists, and a lot of them are contracted, but he lists that Ignatius, that in Ignatius, and that's in his writing of Ephesians, we find theos. Do you see that? Remember that now, Ignatius. And in Hippolytus, we find theos. You see that? And in Gregory, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce that yet without looking at my key, but this gentleman here, he says and quotes theos. All right? And Meyer says all these passages seem to testify in favor of theos. So, Meyer, here again we have another well-known commentator he's laying out both cases. He says, well, I favor this one, but here's all of this evidence too. Okay? I mean, that's the fair way to go about it. And that's what I'm trying to do with you. I'm showing you evidence. I'm showing you where and how you can research this for yourself. And you can weigh this out for yourself. Okay? And I'm trying to make it as simple as I can. And so, again, this seriously undercuts Johnnie's sweeping claim that he says that no patristic before the late 4th century has this kind of language. Now remember, I told you to hang on to those 3 names. Because Ignatius, in the early 2nd century, and you got to catch the power of that, half a decade after the fall of the temple. Ignatius and Hippolytus in the early 3rd century. They both predate this idea. In other words, this language, this God manifestation in flesh formula is found prior to Johnnie's blanket assertion that no one prior to the 4th century used this kind of language. So whether this is ignorance or not, I don't know. But I know that it is misleading, and I know that it is patently false, because I've just showed you. And so Johnnie's treatment of 1 Timothy 3:16 follows the same old tired playbook used by those who try to erase the force of baptism. They argue that because the Codex Vaticanus and the Codex Sinaiticus omit the last 12 verses of Mark 16, well, therefore, baptism is null and void. But what they either are ignorant of or ignore is the fact that Justin Martyr, writing in the mid-2nd century, quotes Mark 16:16 verbatim. Verbatim. Do you catch that? And so in both cases, the deception is the same. Lean on a couple of manuscripts to overturn the united witness of the broader textual and patristic tradition while disregarding early testimony that undercuts the claim. Okay, then we have the Christological force. Even if one reads hos, the pronoun, well, Meyer argues that on internal grounds, the 6 lines are best read as a Christological hymn. The unnamed subject of the pronoun, hos, can be none other than Christ. And the Greek phrase rendered, which was manifested in flesh, presupposes his pre-existence as the eternal Logos. He then explains how the Greek phrase rendered justified in the Spirit means that Christ was shown in his divine glory. That is, the Logos, the eternal Son of God, was veiled by the flesh. So again, here you have a man that is laying out both sides of the equation. And he is admitting the deity of Christ. So in short, Meyer explicitly affirms Christ's pre-existence and deity, even while he prefers the hos reading. And that information that I'm showing you, again, that you can look up for yourself, this is fatal to Johnnie's thesis. Yes, again, Meyer prefers hos on balance, but he also admits the other side. And so after canvassing evidence, Meyer notes many modern critics prefer the hos reading, but he still records that the Textus Receptus, that there and in these manuscripts of D, K, and L, and nearly all cursives, Theos is found. And that is a far, far cry from blanket statements like, well, there's just no early support for this, or this is a forgery. And so here's how these 3 main witnesses line up. Metzger, the 20th century, concludes that hos is the original reading, giving it an A rating, which is virtually certain, and again, that's his opinion. And he explains that the contracted form of theos could arise by the confusion of the contraction or dogmatic clarifications. And he notes that broad early patristic and virginal support for Hos does exist. And then Meyer, he prefers Hos textually, but he stresses the line clearly refers to Christ, presupposing his pre-existence and divine glory as the eternal Logos. And then he catalogs substantial witnesses for Theos. And the patristic voices like Ignatius and Hippolytus. And then we have Albert Barnes, as we have just quoted, and then Adam Clarke, also, who personally examined the Codex Alexandrinus and was convinced the original reading was Theos, or God. And together, these show that even when critics prefer Hos, like Metzger and Meyer, the verse still affirms Christ's divine identity. And when the defenders press for Theos, like Barnes and Clarke, the doctrine of the incarnation is made explicit. And so, again, we come back to Johnnie's cherry picking of the patristic testimony. And he says that no ante-Nicene father bears witness to Theos here, but as you have just seen in Meyer's own catalog, that disproves Johnnie's claim. The fathers, he says that the fathers reflecting Hos include Origen, and he mentions some, but anyway, I've just shown you that Hippolytus and Ignatius and even this Gregory Thaumaturgus, and I know I butchered that terrible, but anyway, Gregory, they all three of these use God manifested in the flesh language prior to the 4th century. And this is the exact opposite of no patristic evidence. It is a mixture of patristic evidence, and it is exactly what textual critics expect around a well-attested variant, and it cannot be turned into the kind of one-way proof that Johnnie wants. And again, the fact that Ignatius from the early 2nd century, along with Hippolytus and Gregory Thaumaturgus, I might have got it close that time. These from the 3rd century all use Theos language long before the Codex Alexandrinus came along in the 5th century. And so I've got a lot more stuff here, but I'm not going to go into it because I've given you plenty of evidence to demonstrate that Johnnie's claims that this is a forgery, they're patently false. And that there's no patristic evidence for God manifested type language prior to the 4th century, that is patently false. I've demonstrated that. And so, once again, we have thoroughly debunked the Unitarian stance on this passage of 1 Timothy 3 and verse 16. And so my voice is thoroughly exhausted. And again, I'm going to close the study here. And I thank you so much for your time that you've invested with us. And please don't forget to smash the like button. Share our videos out. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, click the bell icon so you receive notifications every time we upload a video. And share our videos out with your friends and your neighbors and your groups that you're members of and so forth. And so until our next scheduled lesson in this series of Debunking Unitarians, I pray that God will bless you richly in your study of His Word. And so again, thank you folks so much for your precious time.